early, starting with the Sumerians, circa 3500 BC, you get this intense specialization of labor. You have the priesthood, you have the nobility, you have the merchant classes. Everyone specializes in a particular caste or a particular area. And so the individual is regarded as a part of a larger whole. And the mandala image, according to Campbell, was produced by the psyche to integrate the individual into a larger whole, to make it feel as though you were a cell living within an organism, the organism of society. And he says, this came to me when I read a passage in a book by Goethe Roheim on how early sort of Aboriginal cultures, in particular if you can trace this back to the earliest, the hunting cultures, the individual in each of those cultures is entirely self-sufficient. A 13-year-old boy in these societies can go off and wander off alone into the forest and basically carries the entire mythology and technology of the tribe along with him and can produce it spontaneously. And he said this is why there aren't any mandalas amongst these Paleolithic traditions, because there's simply no need for them. The individual is a whole, and there is no necessity for integrating him as part into a larger whole. And so I want to show you now the actual historical emergence of the mandala. You can, I've taken a number of images from Maria Gimbutas's marvelous books on the goddess traditions. And these are, I'm sorry?
The screen down on the
These are, this is from Maria Gimbutas's not the language of the goddess, but the civilization of the goddess. And this is basically the oldest pottery in the world. And the ceramic traditions begin coming in right about 6500 BC. The first sort of town villages begin to emerge, Çatalhöyük and Hasalar, right about 7500 BC. Agriculture comes in right about 9500 BC. So there's an agricultural base, and that lays the foundation for a sort of rootedness. Why follow the herds if you can just stay in one place? And particularly if you can bring in animal domestication, you don't have to go chasing after the animal anymore. So there's a new kind of, the plant becomes now the fascinating image, and the whole society begins to just stay in one place like a plant and put down roots, very much on the analogy of what a plant does. And so then we get ceramics coming in as soon as we get these little villages, and these ceramics are from Old Europe. Gimbutas concentrates on the civilization that she calls Old Europe, and it includes basically the whole area of Romania, Yugoslavia, Greece, all of that. And we see that the first images that appear on these, we don't see any mandala images anywhere. What we have are these chevrons and zigzags and triangles, and Gimbutas goes through and says what we begin to see in these early images is the foundation of what later becomes writing. Writing begins with inscribing a pictographic tradition onto these pottery shards, and these are all, they look purely abstract, but she says you can trace them and find that they are images of the goddess and her powers. The triangle, particularly the downward pointing triangle, is always associated with the vagina of the goddess. The V, the letter V itself, according to Gimbutas, and this is the first chapter of her book, The Language of the Goddess, the V is the vagina of the goddess, and the letter V, actually, you can trace it coming out of that, comes from that. And here we have images, stylized images of water. That's the watery abyss from out of which all things come into being, the body of the goddess herself. And these are all various manifestations in one context or another of either her power or her energy or her fecundity. And so they turn out not to be just decorative at all, but mythologically inspired. And they lay the foundation for writing. But there are no mandalas here, you'll notice. And from about the same time period, there's another style. We have, there we had abstractions of water imagery. Here we have abstractions of fire imagery. And once again, we have no mandalas. We have these little centerpieces. And I've forgotten what Gimbutas said this referred to, this diamond shape. But these are fire images. And then here's the precursor to the mandala, moving up to about 6300 to 5900 BC. These are the early ones, and they move up from early to middle to late period. And as you can see on the early ones, there are no mandalas. There are these are probably stylized images of birds, is my guess. And here is the ancestor of the mandala slowly emerging into being, the spiral. The culture that I just showed you before, the Sesklo culture, did not have the spiral. You look all through their pottery, and there is no spiral. But the culture that comes after them, the Starchevo culture, brings in the innovation of the spiral. And this begins the vortex from out of which the universe spins itself into being. In the great Greek pre-Socratic philosophers, they always imagine the world as this vortex which sort of spins itself into being. And that comes right out of this tradition. And here is a very highly developed, the artwork is getting better and better as we go through here. This is 5100 to 4900 BC, and we have these very elegantly developed spirals indicating the vortices of the goddess. And here we have the checkerboard motif coming in, and these are very elegant. You can already see the Greek pottery style, the ancestor of it here. And then as we move further upward in time to 4900 to 4600 BC, we start getting mandala images. We start seeing these quadrated motifs begin to spin themselves into being from out of these spirals. So we actually have the mandala coming into being, whirling itself into being from out of these spirals in these early goddess cultures. Spirals down here. And then here is the definite emergence of the mandala here by between 5000 and 4500 BC. The mandala is in existence. You have these abstract quadrated images, one right here and another right here. And now we have these aesthetically conceived fields, totally abstract, purely aesthetic, purely geometrical fields that weren't in existence during the Paleolithic and had no use for the hunters, but now we find them coming into being. And so the mandala turns out to be, according to Campbell, not something that's innate to the Saki, but something that did definitely gradually evolve itself into being. And so that's the gist of the essay, The Symbol Without Meaning. And he goes through and he goes into detail on these various transformations of culture. He shows you the emergence of the first swastika in 10,000 BC. But now what I want to do is bring out the central tension of the essay, and we might phrase it just in terms of astrological archetypes as the tension between Saturn and Uranus. He never mentions either of those, of course, but the language that he uses turns out to be the tension between them. And we have, as it were, Uranus versus Saturn, the principle of the individual and innovation versus tradition and restriction on innovation. He says when civilization begins to emerge, these mandalas come into being and they form a kind of cultural membrane that protects the society and is imprinted upon the individual psyche and ends up protecting the individual psyche from incursions from the unknown. So the individual is given a kind of map for what the world looks like. And he says this is really the opposite of a revelation. It transforms reality into a fixed system of references so that everything that comes to you is interpreted in terms of a kind of cosmological map that orients the individual, but it also closes you off to the impacts of totally unprecedented experiences. And so he associates the mandala with the Saturnian principle of restriction and constriction, which comes into being along with the emergence of high civilization about 4500, 3500 BC, and the Uranian principle with the principle of the Titan hero, the shaman, the yogi. And he says, when you look at the Paleolithic hunting societies, the primary myth is the vision quest. The individual goes out, and you can find this among some of the Native American societies. The individual goes out and is alone, usually right around adolescence. And in many cases, will just sit and fast and will not eat for days and days and days until a vision comes to him. And the vision that comes to him will be totally unpredicted, but it will be usually either a vision of the person's ancestors or a vision of some animal master, a familiar of some kind, a magical being, who will then come to him. It's a little bit like Christ going out into the desert, and sort of imprint him with the impact of a totally fresh, totally unprecedented experience. And the degree to which he absorbs the power from the experience is the degree to which he becomes either a shaman or a warrior, and how good of a shaman or a warrior he is. If he turns out to be a kind of Jonah with bad luck,